Monsters aren't born, they are created. Take a deep breath, folks, for we are back in a land of pure imagination, except it isn't. Planet Punpun does not exist, only a cruel, cold world in which meaning is laughable, purpose is fictional, and warmth is as fleeting as the fluttering heartbeat of a love-struck child. But what happens when that fluttering continues indefinitely, mutating to a pounding and eventually scorching pain? Punpun Onodera, a victim, a villain, a savior, a do-gooder, a monster, a child, a man. All accurate statements at one point or another. A modern Greek tragedy, someone from the crowd calls. I shoot them, for I was going to say that. The titular character is one of neglected innocence, growing furiously hungry for what he lacketh, and vows to carve his presence out with bloody hands and a fool from grace. Punpun begins the story as a sweet boy, quiet and shy, unknowing of the wondrous wider world, the millions of stars that dot the ever-growing horizon of his ambitions. He is a child full to the brim with hope, a word that resonates with the story of Goodnight Punpun more than perhaps any other. The gaining of hope, the fueling of hope, the delusion of hope, and the fallout of hope. Punpun suffers many problems growing up, beginning as early as his childhood. So let's peel back the curtain and start there. His domestic situation is one of constant suffering. The literal time we first see his parents depicts them in a fight, a seemingly alcoholic father flipping out, swearing and launching things across the room in rage. Punpun is used to days like this. The presented power dynamic is a common stereotype. However, it's revealed later to be a reversal of what Punpun perceives. The next day he goes downstairs to find the room in tatters and his mother unconscious on the floor. His father lies to Punpun and is arrested the next day under the assumption he physically assaulted his mother. Punpun believes this to be the truth. Whilst his mother is depicted as a suffering victim at parts, it is, in my opinion, the opposite completely. His dad has issues as well, primarily his drinking problem. In chapter 16 we are shown a fight from earlier in their life, just after his father is fired from work and resorts to copious amounts of alcohol. His mother cries about her regrets about both birthing Punpun and marrying his father. His dad verbally assaults her and both her and Punpun leave the house. As the story progresses though, we truly see the nature of both Mama and Papa Punyama, as his mother is detached, mentally deranged, sporadic, angry, sad, resentful, neglectful, compared to Punpun's father, who is shown to be sorrowful, regretful, loving and willing to improve Punpun's life. Under the circumstances, however, he is forcibly withdrawn and not present for most of it. Devastatingly revealed in chapter 59 is that Punpun's father was innocent all along. He didn't physically assault Mama, but saved Punpun's life. She made unhinged claims of planning to stab Punpun to death and then herself. His father is not left with many options due to her unpredictable nature, coupled with an armed weapon, so knocks her out with the microwave and lies to Punpun to ease the load. So yes, Papa Punyama has his issues. He drinks too much and doesn't provide the care a parent should, but still deeply cares for Punpun in his own way, not seeing him as an object of resentment. His mother, though, is more to blame for Punpun's lack of love growing up. She is unstable, suicidal, obsessed with herself, and a life in which she thinks she has wasted, resenting Punpun for anchoring her down to a boring existence. At this point, though, the friction and explosion of negative emotion is the norm, stripping a young boy from any cohesive family bond, treated more like a burden than a joy. This has a devastating impact down the line, relating to his low self-esteem, feeling unworthy and unloved from as early as here. The monster he becomes can entirely be tracked back to the emptiness of the family dynamic, as Punpun suppresses the sadness and forms unhealthy coping mechanisms due to his futility in changing how his mother and father interact with each other. After his father is banished, his mother is free to spiral even further, but more on her later. Another cause for Punpun's descent into utter madness and the most discussed, Aiko. Now, I have done an entire video dedicated to her, so be sure to peep that after this one, but Aiko's role in Punpun's life is one of ultimate pain, whilst also ultimate pleasure. Punpun falls in love with Aiko the moment he sees her, an innocent childhood crush that we all experience. It is wholesome at first. Aiko is a girl who's implied to suffer a lot as well domestically, and the reader finds positivity in Aiko and Punpun meeting as they support each other's loneliness. A future with Aiko is an idealized addiction for Punpun in his wishes to escape his unhappy home, and commits to running away to Kagoshima with her while still both children. It is a promise he cannot keep, however, realizing how obscene it is, as they are both kids and not capable of anything. After breaking the promise to her, the relationship shatters, with Aiko becoming a distant fantasy, accepting Punpun's rejection and trying to find someone else to fulfill her need to escape. 2 years pass, with Punpun being around 12 or 13 years of age. His crush has been morphing slowly into unhealthy obsession, becoming even more unsociable, enclosed in his mind, laughing through the pain, not telling anyone his issues. It becomes worse with the fact Aiko begins dating an older boy, the two seemingly happy together, whilst Punpun watches on in agony. Still, it's a common experience and relatable for many kids growing up. Someone you feel so warmly about with someone else, it hurts a lot, as you cannot will someone else's feelings. He acknowledges that his thoughts are taking a dark path, and for a child of only 12 or 13, this is quite tragic indeed. His inner monologue is one of violent ideation, wanting to punish Yuichi for leading her astray, doing mental gymnastics to justify his dark emotions. But he realizes that Yuichi is actually a solid bloke, and this causes more turmoil inside. He resorts to masturbation a lot to cope, chasing a bit of pleasure to escape the growing prison of his mind. His inner monologue, bred from self-loathing and lack of worth, most likely from his parents, is depressing, his thoughts constantly referring to his negativity and self-depreciation to justify why he is so lowly. His naive but admirable beliefs of wanting everyone to be happy are slowly eaten away. After seeing Aiko again running from Yuichi crying but ignoring Punpun as she passes, his mind explodes into further disarray. The confusion of this young innocent boy and idealization of Aiko is still optimistic, even if it seems unhealthy. At this point of the story, Punpun still has hope. This hope climaxes with the badminton plot as Aiko laments about her loneliness, suffering, fears and worries about life, the future and death. She grabs his hand, her warmth exciting Punpun, making a flurry of emotions pump throughout him. He doesn't really acknowledge her deep cries of loneliness, understanding at a basic level that she still wants someone to save her, and more focused on the fact he has an opportunity to claim her unfairly for himself. His inner monologue belittles him for his noble and logical side, the promise to Yuichi that Aiko's future depends on the badminton match, not his own intervening desires. But every part of himself screams at him to forfeit this falsity of him being a good person, throw it all away and indulge in his true feelings: lust, greed, desire, action. He grips her hand tightly back, still hopeful of being the one for her, the savior to swoop in. Betraying the good in him, he defeats Yuichi, falling back and letting the darkness within dictate his every action like a primal beast. However, this is met instantly with guilt. Yuichi loses the match, but Punpun feels disgusted that he allowed himself to be overwhelmed so easily by his darker instincts. This shows a distinct battle with Punpun, the good in him still struggling to overcome the bad, leaving Aiko in fear of his complete defeat should he allow himself to intertwine with her again. He cries at the amalgamation of emotions he experiences in such a short time: ecstasy, followed by regret, followed by disgust. This area of the story is certainly where the scales begin to tip, the growing evil within festering. He reflects on his recent emotions, the solitude of his bedroom, a haven of retreat, the unsociable nature growing each day. We can see the naivety of his childhood dreams slowly waning as he admits those stars that seemed touchable as a child are now bounding away from his grasp, a metaphor of vanishing options, hope and dreams he has left. Although it is common for younger people to view every small setback as a world-ending event, the important part is to learn to rationalize and overcome these setbacks to grow and understand the world better. Punpun, however, does not. He does not discuss his issues with anyone, sabotaging his ability to learn and regulate his turbulent emotions, to the point even his friends begin giving up on him. More on Aiko later. Another influence in Punpun's domestic life is his uncle, who enters more frequently after his father's departure, as he is the younger brother to Punpun's unstable mother. In many ways, Yuichi is a reflection of what older Punpun may become. He is depressed, pessimistic, lost, and sinful. He has broken relationships with family and failed romances, just like younger Punpun. His inner thoughts are practically identical to Punpun's own, such as the ones he experiences in chapter 31, condemning superficiality and remaining tethered to his ultimate anguish. He often rants about things he sees as stupid, such as the one he has against Aiko's stepmother when she attempts to peddle the cultist's water products, or when he condemns the craziness of Punpun's mother and her self-destructive tendencies. His presence is one of a cautionary guide and nihilistic influence to Punpun, whilst he does attempt to teach Punpun about the troubles of adult life and attempts to leash the spiraling of his sister by acting as a glue to reality for both Mama and Punpun. His openness in discussing suicidal thoughts and depression ultimately leaves a negative impact on Punpun, who becomes more accepting that suffering is an inescapable phenomenon that he simply must accept. After another 2-year skip, Punpun is now a high school freshman aged 15 as of chapter 47. Tying into the Yuichi plotline is probably the worst thing that happens to young Punpun, and that is the sexual assault from Midori, Yuichi's girlfriend. Due to Yuichi's depression, he's often distant and bad at communicating with his partner, which leads to long-winded disappearances where he aimlessly tries figuring his life out, mostly ending with more despair and frustration with his place in the universe. He has been missing for a week by now, and Midori and Mama discuss his whereabouts, both a sense of doubt and sorrow exuding from the conversation. This takes a mental toll on Midori, who is in her late 20s by now, but manages to keep positive thanks to her personal dreams still remaining alight. Her and Punpun share a wholesome bond thanks to Midori practically living with Punpun, helping out both him and his mother. She is kind, sweet, helpful, willing, and a positive energy in his life of many negative adults. Yuichi admits to a taxi driver that he had an affair whilst dating Midori, showcasing his terrible willpower and lustful addictions. Everyone has flaws, and in her suffering thanks to Yuichi, reaches out to Punpun in a way that crosses every line possible. As they are talking, curled up in an admittedly inappropriate way already, as she is meant to be a guardian figure in his life, begins feeling Punpun's body, slowly reaching down his trousers to touch him, all whilst expressing her fears of him growing up. Punpun flings away, shaking and scared, but Midori continues until she is on top of him. Punpun goes into a frozen state, a common bodily response to such events, as the body and mind fails to process and react properly due to the shock or other factors. For example, Punpun's desire to be liked, loved and appreciated, linking back to his neglect felt often from his parents when younger, passively accepts many things as he does not value his own desires in relation to others' happiness in parts of the manga. Midori is suffering, but her coping mechanism is one of unforgivable disgrace, and it is not an excuse in the slightest. She overwhelms Punpun's emotions with her dominance in the power dynamic held before, knowing she can practically force him into this. The age of consent in Japan during publication was 13, but that doesn't even matter as Punpun does not even consent, frozen and crying actual tears as Midori selfishly derives pleasure to subside her anguish. It is a big shock moment in the manga, taking one of the only morally correct characters and shredding her up. Just because it is not malicious does not mean it isn't wrong or selfish, adding sexual abuse to Punpun's adolescent torment. After the events, Punpun leaves in silence, choosing once again to let it all build up inside of him, rather than expressing his pain. So, the people Punpun has to rely on. A drunkard mother obsessed with retaining her fading youth by hooking up with random men and neglecting Punpun's necessities, doing the bare minimum with often cold remarks. an uncle who is depressed and irresponsible, unable to control his base desires and despising the world due to his own self-loathing, Midori, who quite literally does that to him, and a legally withdrawn father who had issues with drinking, conflict with his mother, and does not see Punpun often. Not a single positive person. Of course, this is a recipe for disaster, imbuing Punpun with all the wrong lessons of life, lacking support for his emotions growing up, learning to bottle it all up. Some time passes and Punpun and his mother visit his grandfather's house, who recently passed away. Midori is there, Punpun finding it insane how she is acting like nothing happened, missing the irony that he himself is also acting like everything is okay. He doesn't show his suffering on the forefront of his appearance, and therefore no one truly knows how dark he is feeling all the time. As she wonders why his mother didn't tell Punpun that she and Yuichi got married, all he can think about is the assault he suffered and how no one even seems to care. It is revealed later that Yuichi is aware of what happened, but unless Midori twisted events to make it seem more consensual, acts as if it isn't an issue in the slightest. He treats it like another turn in the big cog of life, brushing years worth of pain caused by it under the rug because justice and morality simply do not matter. Due to his silent nature, Midori gets away with it without punishment in the slightest. He wants to cause violent harm to her sexual organs, but becomes passive in pain once more, uttering congratulations at her fusion. We see the utter disconnectedness of him and his mother on their journey home, as she attempts to converse with him about things, but fails miserably. Due to her prior built-up resentment towards Punpun, this causes her to lash out much quicker and aggressively than others may, calling him an idiot, narcissist, and a pretend victim. She truly knows nothing about him, and we cannot blame Punpun for his lack of opening up. He was never ever provided that avenue as a child, so why would it appear naturally to him now? He places blame upon selfish adults and himself, briefly hopeful that the world is full of happiness and good people. His school life is not much better. Punpun feels out of place with everyone he interacts with, not adapting to any social circle, and even more isolated now than when he was a kid. At least back then he had some friends. He tries fitting in, gelling his hair and aligning himself with the fashion of the time, but still not feeling seen for who he truly is. Even with Kani noticing him and a new potential romance lighting up, it does not lead anywhere significant. Allowing a bleak distraction by acting like a chivalrous man on a date for a bit of joy in the turmoil of his domestic situation, they fail to connect emotionally, something that he has always struggled with. But Punpun still finds his mind wandering back to the warmth of his childhood friends and Aiko. Back then he had people he could at least share experiences with, Aiko the only person he believed he could connect with, morphing into a necessity rather than desire or love for him. The memory of her is becoming a sustenance he survives on, the good of the world, the freedom from pain, all contained within that little bubble named Aiko Tanaka. Punpun's warped perceptions of what a relationship, romantic or sexual, should be obliterate his chances with Kani. He has no reference of what a healthy relationship should be, so it is only natural he messes up what he could have. He states cold, uncaring remarks about his mother's surgery to Kani, and whilst it is natural to have those feelings, spouting them to someone who actively loves and wishes the best for family, who you barely know, is a dumb thing to do. Then again, he has no one else to actually speak about such things to. She barrages him with questions about his intentions and what he's feeling about her and everything, but he falters on forming actual replies. She labels him a faker who wants others to like him, which I partially disagree with Kani, who has no proper justification for that claim as she doesn't truly know him. I wouldn't say Punpun is self-centered here, he's a victim of many things at this point, and his ability to express his emotions clearly is stunted. That being said, Punpun launches at her trying to kiss her to make everything become right again. The lack of understanding of people and the abuse he suffered from Midori play a part in his use of physical action instead of words, and Kani slaps him, disgusted and realizing it was all a big mistake. He masturbates in the darkness and rain, once again using it to cope with his frustration and cast away his teenage horniness. The death of Punpun's mother is another significant moment in his life, but not for emotional reasons. After developing a fatal cancer, his mother is on her deathbed, asking Punpun if he still hates her. He says nothing, watching her cast contradicting statements about her lack of and excessive love for the child she never really cared for. It is an emotionally churning moment nonetheless for the readers, as Asano is a master of causing sympathetic responses to his many diverse and challenged characters. Despite all her problems, irresponsible relationship pursuits, alcoholism, and midlife crisis, she still was a person, a human who knew not where they belonged, making all the wrong choices and regretting them. After the funeral, Punpun reflects that he can never love his mother, and I cannot blame him. A single affirmation versus years of contempt falls pathetically to the side, and Punpun is stripped of another person in his life. His father visits a bit later with an explosive, happy energy with much more stressless banter than in the past. Punpun attempts to negate the impact and the neglect he had on him, which I think again is an example of his passivity to allow others to continue their lives without conflict. But the neglect is one of the sole reasons he's like this to begin with. Both his mother and father say too little too late, the damage is done. Like real life, you cannot magically patch up years worth of pent-up resentment, loneliness and longing with a few words or smiles. His father asks if Punpun wants to live with him, a new beginning with just the two of them. He tries to persuade Punpun by claiming they've always been such good friends, but this means as little as a raindrop in a thunderous ocean. He is simply a stranger to Punpun, bound oddly through blood. An awkward end to the encounter makes his father cry as he walks off, probably realizing how awful he was when it mattered. His uncle lectures him, also seeing the reflection of himself in Punpun, and says things he probably wished to have heard when he was younger. The entire talk is rather simple. Live your life the way you want to live it. If things go wrong, don't blame anyone else, blame your choices. Continue to slog it all out, the daily grind that you may hate, as there is a glorious thing called chance in this world. The chance it gets all better, something good comes your way, to make a pitiful life worth living. It ends with Punpun smoking a cigarette, which symbolizes a step into adulthood and a point of no return. One thing the story of Goodnight Punpun painfully elaborates on is the fact that every single one of us has our own issues, our own life and choices we must make, and potential guilt, regret, and pain as a result. And unless you are super connected with someone else, no one will care for your suffering, and that it is expected of you to silence yourself and pretend everything is going well. Asano obviously expresses it as a criticism of society, with Punpun the central shining example of what silent suffering can do to someone. Unfortunately for Punpun, one of the catalysts re-enters the scope of his life, innocently attending her own expected duties to survive in this depressingly cold world. But just a quick glimpse of her outside the train is enough of a spark to relight the hollow, grim world within. One reason his life became so dull is due to him equipping his idealized version of Aiko with all potential future happiness, so that when she disappears from his life, he's left with a longing desire that simply cannot be fulfilled. But our hero, at this stage, charges forth to catch her, hearkening back to the talk he had with his uncle. Only he can change things. Aiko herself is never the villain. A lot of people call her annoying or self-centered, and I don't acknowledge them as human beings, or they are simply misogynists. She had a terrible life too, and it isn't her fault that this random boy she's not seen for several years pinned all of life's colour upon her abused shoulders. At this point of the story, Punpun is starting to live alone, escaping, but not purposefully, the captivity of his assaulter, who just continued being a parental figure, such as leaving him useful notes, giving him motherly advice, caring for him, and providing that attentiveness he did not receive as a child. Obviously, that doesn't matter considering the revolting thing she did, ruining all possible perceptions of Midori being a good, kind-hearted person in my eyes. Punpun was accepting that mundane existence, but the shock of Aiko and flurry of emotions one's not recently accustomed towards, as he hasn't seen her in ages, kicks a new gear into his resolve and runs with the newfound hope of a lost love. However, he fails to find her after seeing her and continues life with the bare minimum effort required, which is why he appears as a triangle during this part of the story. I'll be delving into his form and meaning at the end, so I won't expand too much on it right now, but currently he is the most simple form possible, lacking the ability to have a developed, complex appearance to society. He is locked in, unable to express himself, perhaps social anxiety. Meeting Sachi is another life-changing shift for Punpun, as she is a truly positive force that wishes for the best of Punpun, and potentially one of the most morally good people in the entire manga, although the bar is very, very low. However, his thoughts have become darker and darker, especially going into his adulthood, with the fantasy of outright sexually assaulting her, wanting to be killed for his stupidity, dreaming about the child version of Aiko, the one he pinned all his hopes upon. Some of his phrases and jokes are nothing more than edgy and intrusive thoughts, one's many experiencing emptiness and depression due to cope with the pain of their sadness. Weirdly, he claims he is faking mental illness. However, Punpun is very cynical at this point and most likely does not validate his own mental illness, as he believes it is completely self-inflicted, thanks to his uncle's words of adult responsibility, along with the lack of support growing up that practically forced him to take the blame for others' misdeeds. Sachi gets Punpun to open up, which is a very rare phenomenon, maybe not discussing his deepest issues and their causes, but he is very bluntly honest with her, talking about his current loneliness and sexual desires, and how he saw her pubic hairs and fled. He alludes to his empty wish to settle things with Aiko, despite not being able to find her, but right now he is more sad and flaccid than angry and fueled, and Sachi sees through this as a simple excuse for him to continue doing nothing whilst appearing conflicted. She gives him some deep reflection about what it means to be lonely, pathetic, and without purpose. Fuck the past, dreams are meant to be fulfilled. Her philosophy is the antithesis of Punpun's own, as his hopes and dreams are clamped down in an unattainable past. Her seeing and resonating with Punpun is a blessing he never truly values, but regardless destroys the pyramid he was entrapped within, as the bird finally emerges itself thanks to her harsh but honest words. So as of chapter 84, hope is regained for Punpun. He finds passion in the warmth of the summer, devising a manga with Sachi, his friendship with Mimura, and the chance to become a better person. Healing from his past trauma presents itself. But in true Punpun fashion, even while smashing Sachi, those pain-drenched memories of his past crop into his mind, Aiko still ever present, still hindering any potential relationships he may have in the future. A lot of readers mock Punpun for his inability to escape his childhood crush. However, as I'm sure you've realized watching this video, he simply had nothing else to attach positivity to as he grew up. She was a blast of freshness, a new change, and one that his lack of emotional maturity permitted to be let go. Sachi is absolutely his soulmate, the one who understands him better than himself, but Punpun is so far gone that the right decision is always a mystery to him. His past has crippled his progress, and now all he does is make idiotic statements and dumb choices. His self-sabotaging nature kicks in and mocks him for being even momentarily happy during the winter snows, and darkness once again shrouds the future of Punpun, completely due to his own personality. Even with Sachi's constant attempts to spur improvement in Punpun, his negativity is overwhelming, choosing to seclude himself, crying over his uselessness. It is at this stage we can more easily criticize his choices, as by chapter 99 he is a 20-year-old adult who chooses the wrong things even with the support structure available for him to reach out to. Thanks to his unwillingness to cooperate in his own life, the two drift a bit, and he finds solitude again, something that Punpun seeks rather than runs away from these days. Whilst in the depths of darkness, he resorts once again to masturbation, engaging in a ridiculously pathetic fantasy with the male next door who he constantly hears having sex with his girlfriend, Takashi. Due to his grounded, acceptable presence within society, Punpun gravitates to that unreachable, in his mind, aspect. His self-esteem so unbearably low, he's begun sexualizing fitting in. If you saw this from an outside perspective, you'd call it beyond embarrassing, but since we know how he ended up this way, readers will still feel pity and hope for him to improve. Just after the climax, he claims he's in love with Taka in a twisted, satirical way. It is a clear sign of his declining mental health, but certainly not the full darkness that is incoming. The final and breath-stealing moment of chapter 99, an unsuspecting Aiko sits down next to an unsuspecting Punpun, ending with one phrase, "The world is mine." Okay, Aiko's return, the moment that allows the growls of the monster to stir within. Fangs have not been shown yet, but we shall see his malice rise to the surface soon enough. They talk for a bit, both lying to hide behind a facade of contentedness, like a conditioned soldier of society, as most of the people they've interacted with their entire life have never spared a thought for the suffering of another. So they both have defenses up, Punpun boasting Taka's accolades as his own, and Aiko following suit, a cushy life of modelling and mature boyfriend with no issues at all, both none the wiser. The spite begins to gnaw at his mind, however, as Aiko chatters on about her life and daily activities since their departure, Punpun unable to believe that this girl is the same person he's idolized for over a decade. The current Aiko does not match up to the distorted version in his mind, the one with such wondrous statements, unyielding desires for the future, and an abundant childhood innocence and whimsy that he associated with her. This is made clear from the fact he references Yuichi as if it was just last week they were fighting for her hand, and Aiko sees him nothing more as a blast from the past. She is another cog in the machine, just like every other human, and Punpun begins to realize this more frequently. The Aiko he envisioned never truly existed, the one who could pull him from despair and launch him into eternal happiness, and instead of staying honest to his uncle's teaching, he decides to pin the blame onto her, just as he pinned his hope. After meeting a couple more times, not connecting truly at all, Punpun relying on Taka's personality to make any progress, expressing more unsynchronized behavior, he does not know her, and she hides behind a false smile all the while. With the fall of night, the mood shifts, and his dark face matches her own. They end up in a hotel, Aiko looking very sad, empty, and lost, but Punpun is feeling betrayed, in his twisted and rotting mind, wanting to knock her into the depths of despair. Obviously, Aiko deserves none of this. As I've stated many times before, she was a young girl and Punpun's limerence for her was due to his neglect and naivety from home. But his villainous side erupts, blaming her for cursing him, not wanting to forgive her, some ludicrous reasoning that exhibits detachment from reality, forcing his hand inside her, taking what he wants without asking for her permission, or responding to her questions that she asks multiple times. It is a disgusting and traumatic experience to read, with Aiko saying stop multiple times. So yes, Punpun sexually assaults her, and Aiko cries a tear of either pain or disappointment. The victim has become the villain. We cannot forgive him on the basis of his past at this stage. His thoughts and actions are now openly diabolical. Rejecting the constant wishes of Sachi to help him stick to a healthy road, he brought this newfound darkness upon himself, even if his turbulent past was an influence. We can hate him without the hope of betterment, as he is now actively destroying others, fueled by his own spite, regret, and hate for the world, which culminates in blaming Aiko. Despite their disjointed, horrible meeting last time, Aiko allows for him to talk to her after they randomly bump into each other again, with Punpun actually apologizing for what he did, taking responsibility after the words of Yuichi rang around his head days before. This is not enough for me to forgive him though. He made a disgusting choice based on spite, which we are specifically shown in his thoughts, but Aiko brushes it aside as if it was just the way things go. Punpun puts all his cards on the table, hiding nothing and revealing all his inner thoughts, especially his obsessive searching for Aiko and what she represents. It is a nice moment of retrospective and even teases Punpun's chance to heal from his obsession with Aiko now that he has realized she is not the heroine he built up, but simply another human with visible flaws. He comments on his own trashy existence, so it's safe to say he's being honest, as these thoughts align with those he thinks in silence as well. Horrifyingly, Aiko is still stuck in a childish mentality as well, unchanged from when she was a girl, teasingly reminding him of the promise she made to kill him the next time he lied. Unfortunately for Punpun, his mental health issues are also reflected within Aiko, making them a powerfully self-destructive force when coupled. And she reveals she has been lying a lot as well, also waiting for him all this time. Punpun is rewarded for his truth with a continued curse, and given the opportunity to crawl back into his doubts, regrets, and passive tendencies. the easy way out, which for Punpun has always been surging deeper into that tunnel of suffering with no torch and eyes closed. Aiko updates him on all the lies back at his room and thanks Punpun for not touching her this time. It does not make what he did alright in the slightest, but improvement is technically possible for everyone, not that it comes for Punpun in the long run though. Aiko telling Punpun he hasn't changed a bit is his entire character summed up. To outside people, apart from Sachi, Punpun is the same as he's always been, quiet, modest, and kind. No one, apart from Sachi, has cared to delve deeper into his fibre, what makes him tick, what makes him sick, what makes him cry, and what makes him laugh. They see a cute little bird and think nothing more of him. Asano weaponizes Aiko's statements to really hammer home how little they get each other, even after all the lies are exposed. Punpun is in darkness, and everyone else is so selfish. I go into heavy depth with Aiko's perspective during this part of the story in my Aiko video, which I strongly insist you watch after this one, as it will give a complete context for both characters as we move into the final acts of the manga. So I will barely be explaining Aiko's processes beyond quick mention from this point onwards, including their animalistic yet overwhelmingly depressive sex scene in chapter 109. As mentioned earlier, Aiko is the catalyst for all the evil within Punpun to begin spilling out, claiming her world was always his, and the reason he experienced no motion of time was simply because she was not part of his life, and she was the one. Asano makes it blatant that this reversal of Punpun's mental healing is a mistake, with them flashing by Sachi, the actual one who cares for him beyond all others, a parallel to when he flashed by Aiko all those years ago. Skipping past Aiko central events presents us with one of the most chilling moments of the manga, and in many ways the defining moment of Punpun's monstrous, violent, rageful life. By all means, this was a moment of valiance, a noble act from Punpun that contrasts his meagre, passive life up to this stage, really showing how he has risen from a feeble, unable bird to an actor with the capacity to incite physical brutality. Aiko's mother is trying to kill her with a massive knife, and his inner mind smiles almost triumphantly, claiming it has been waiting for this moment. The spitting rain outside, Aiko in a bloody mess on the floor, a rising crescendo most likely in the reader's mind. Launching himself at this psychotic woman, fear and passivity replaced by rage and instinct, Punpun begins smashing Aiko's stepmother to death, bludgeoning her with the false idol, subtle commentary on how Punpun himself perceives Aiko at this stage. Years of pent-up energy spur on his wrath, not letting up on this beatdown. He endures a stab to the legs, not feeling it due to adrenaline, choking this wretched woman to death, his thoughts cold and absolute. Die. Just flash your mind back to the start of this video, that little innocent boy who wanted the best for everyone. What an incredibly sad journey. Punpun is now horned, no semblance of loving creature remains. The violent storm has swooped in and rescued Aiko from her captor, only to fling her into much, much worse. Whilst Aiko is traumatized and never the same again, Punpun is unaffected, as if he simply snuffed out a bug. But now he knows violence is a valuable coping mechanism. Many more doors have opened up for him. The monster's fangs have dug into his first victim. Even if she was deserving of it, we shall see his evil spread to those who do not. The power dynamic has completely shifted between Aiko and Punpun now, him being in full control thanks to her weak physical state and solidifying his mental fortitude, as he believes himself to be a careless monster who takes what he wants and does what needs to be done. It is as if a cold air seeped into the panels, making everything chillier. Is Punpun truly evil? Maybe not right now. Simply believing he is evil is enough to push him onwards perhaps, to do even worse things, until being evil is an undeniable truth. People who grow up in manipulative environments such as Punpun's own with his mother, father, uncle and Midori will tend to mimic their manipulative aspects even unknowingly or unwillingly, which Punpun begins to do to Aiko. Eventually I believe it is outright manipulation to fuel his own despair, but for now he goes on long tangents before leaving Aiko, obviously knowing she cannot fend for herself in her current state. During this rainy scene, he most likely experiences a surge of power throughout him, the wonder of having a human being at his feet, whilst also feeling despair and regret. No one is completely cold, and no one is completely warm. He rants about humanity to a distant Aiko, underpinning all the issues he has, and whilst it is a fairly basic, obvious and simple take, certainly not a hot one at all, as anyone observing general humanity can smell the stench of selfishness from planets away. It shows how efficient Punpun can speak, using succinct language and clearly expressing his views, contrasting that boy who struggled to say anything about anyone. But the thrill of violence returns, with him relying on it once more, but this time at Aiko. In an act of either desperation to shut her panic attack up or flash anger at her person, he strikes her so brutally that a tooth is launched out of her mouth. The girl he is meant to love and cherish, bleeding and bruised thanks to his nature. He is a terrible person, unable to hide behind the motive of justice any longer, as he too is an abuser. It is the normality he conducts his actions with that horrifies me more, tracing back to the mimicking of parents, breeding this monstrous, apathetic beast. The days on the run pass by, a depressing and sad tone between Aiko and Punpun, his suicidal, pessimistic attitude ruining any chance of Aiko's naive, hopeful aspirations of coming true. He is unwilling to allow himself to be hopeful or to take the right path, as that would be too good for him. The point of the Tinkle Tinkle Hoy or god figure in his mind is the same as what the beast of darkness represents within Guts. All of Guts' hate, contempt, despair, hopelessness, self-loathing manifests into a visual image within his mind to attack him for his weakness and failures to succeed. This is something innately fused into Guts' being and continues to berate him to this day, mockingly dampening his mood. Asano utilizes the concept of God the same way in Goodnight Punpun, differently however, as God grew darker the more Punpun grew, rising from doubts and anxieties to outright hate and suicidal ideation. Younger Punpun used to fight God in order to expel the negative thoughts the boy would have, but now he accepts it as an old friend. In his self-loathing, he agrees, or at least does not object, for Aiko to gouge out his eye. He is totally serious, and this mentally deranged question is framed as completely normal to him. However, Aiko cannot bring herself to go the full way, only injuring his eye partly. Punpun uses this failure as a way to verbally abuse her, taking out his anger of her not being the perfect goddess he wished her to be. And now it does not matter that he reflected in a healing way that one time, as he has reverted to this closed-minded, selfish method of processing. He demands her to continue, but she cannot, as she loves him too much. It ain't love though, that's for sure. It is a sick, twisted mess of two deranged and neglected people in a world that spat them out screaming and crying. After some more sex, empty conversations and travel, he has a dream in which he sees every person who has influenced his life in some way. His parents, his young friends, Yuichi, Kanai, Midori, his uncle, Mimura, Mr. Shishido, Miyuki, Sachi, and himself, sitting all alone on planet Punpun, an existence of solitude, fleeing from those good and honest people who simply enjoyed the presence of him. His suicidal desire kicks in, trying to force Aiko to strangle him to death, as he believes he is scum who deserves to die. Sachi, who is still determined on finding Punpun since his vanishing, speculates if she ever truly understood him, and I have to say in my opinion she didn't truly consider the gravity of his situation. They both shared trauma growing up, her for her ugly looks and him for obvious reasons, but I think she believed he still had part of him that reached out for the light, an escape, and like she did when rising to her own purpose. Unfortunately though, Punpun has always been closed in, only reaching out when he is forcibly yanked, and without Sachi yanking him along life, he curled back up and deteriorated further. She was nothing more than a momentary glimpse of happiness for him, a distraction. Despite their positive memories together, he was never truly free from his past. The power of hiding behind a mask of content is dangerously misleading, and no wonder she's rushing about his old contacts for any way to find him, as she does know Punpun is capable of hurting himself. Ultimately, Sachi is way too good for Punpun, which makes it even sadder that he didn't value her over the ghost of a child called Aiko. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this was an overdose attempt or simply exhaustion due to mental and physical toil, but he returns to Aiko with no issues, so maybe it was a simple collapse. But that is definitely over the recommended intake for painkillers. As mentioned before about their power dynamic, this has only been getting more morally wrong, with Aiko losing touch with reality further. If you compare the Aiko of chapter 110 to the Aiko here, it is obvious her speech, processes, actions, and willpower have all but given up, making her a codependent mess of a person. And Punpun, snapped from the turning event of killing her mother, has assumed the role of both lover, guardian, protector, and adult of the most messed up relationship ever. This is why he rips Aiko away from her Tanabata wish so easily, as 1, he hates wishes, and 2, hates the chance for Aiko to improve her life. People gawk without interfering with this clear injustice, but he only spits back at them to get lost. He is done caring what the world around him thinks, as he does not care about himself in the slightest. His father, much more humble these days, calls him an energetic and talkative, popular child, this being before we were introduced to him in chapter 1. He also says he matured much faster than the other kids, and although he pins this praise on his positive bias as a parent, it is interesting to wonder if everything he is saying is truthful. From what we are shown, his father always had disjointed, unnatural, and neglectful interactions with Punpun, as his conflict with Mama and drinking habits influenced the family state. This did all occur after losing his job, so perhaps life was happier at a certain point, and Papa Punyama did always care for Punpun to a degree, but he was not there to help his son blossom, and therefore he never did. Later on, Punpun asks for the opinion of a stranger on a manga published by Sachi, who is achieving her dream as a published artist and storyteller, something Punpun helped her with a long time ago, but realized her brilliance would flourish with or without him. The guy is oddly wearing the exact same shirt as Punpun, just with light trousers, perhaps hinting at the two sides of the same coin character dynamic, as Punpun sports black trousers, with simplistic light imagery denoting their personalities. He says the manga is boring and none of the characters get it, a simple, honest opinion, but this deeply, deeply affects Punpun, following the innocent man out of the convenience store, face cast in dark, foreboding tones, with the night sky and rainy weather creating the perfect, pathetic fallacy. Accurate juxtaposition is used by Asano, with current Punpun harassing the man on his crime of littering, the conversation escalating with each statement made, as the two men seem to be eerily similar and therefore clash a lot, both latching on to a pointless social justice argument full of pretentiousness and assuming. It erupts into physical assault from Punpun, using the littering as a reason to beat a man brutally with a wooden stick, and Punpun's father explaining the reason why Punpun became such a shut-in young boy and how sweet, kind and innocent he used to be, this demonic figure towering above him with a singular eye dripping with hatred. He is a criminal and an abusive, suicidal person, a monster by all definitions. Gone is that little bird his father cries over simultaneously to this event of anger. Punpun once again relies on violence to cleanse his build-up of emotions, but thankfully Aiko stops him before he can cause serious damage. The guy retaliates by smashing the windshield in, and Papa falls asleep with tears still rolling down his face. The On the Run arc, as I have dubbed it, is full of contrasting emotions, odd phrases, unexplained motives, and utter sadness. Both Aiko and Punpun are detached from reality, and it makes their interactions feel like a fever dream. That is why Punpun saying things such as, "I'm feeling really good right now, I'm truly glad we met," may sound weird and contradictory to his previous comments full of hate, but in my opinion this is just Punpun trying to convince himself of any other story to escape the ultimate pain he truly feels about this. The literal next chapter, Punpun tightens a rope around her neck, saying he is going to kill her. There is not much to say at this point apart from the monster has gone insane, and trying to analyze this from a normal person's perspective is practically impossible. We enter part 13 of the manga with Aiko delusionally hopeful about their newfound life in the island they fled to, and Punpun just saying random things like a fake intellectual with no optimism. He uses that uncomfortably dark manipulation on Aiko again after her thoughts sober up and rightfully attaches blame onto Punpun, brandishing a knife for self-defense on him. Punpun, though, like an unstoppable force of negativity, washes over a weak Aiko, talking gently and deceptively to shake her resolve and make her succumb to the established power dynamic once more. He lets her pierce him with a knife, still whilst lecturing her, showing her a weapon cannot stop his protective powers over Aiko, and she gives up once more, this time sinking even further under his control, as this time he has instructed her to think less and be a mindless robot for him to order, delude himself with, and mate, the chapter ending in consensual sex, albeit messed up. I've spoken extensively about Aiko's suicide in my other video, so go watch that if you're interested, but I will be skipping it here and focusing on Punpun's reaction. Chapter 139 is the most tragic chapter in any manga I have ever read. It is grueling to a level never experienced, and I hate having to go back to it. Punpun does not react to Aiko's death conventionally, with tears, shock, panic, but treats her as still alive. There are multiple reasons for this. I believe at this stage he saw the current Aiko as nothing but an imposter, and the original Aiko is already dead, meaning he had accepted her death a long time ago. He never could accept that a person as special as she was is a continual progressing thing, always changing, never easy to comprehend, and to the very bitter, tragic end never accepted Aiko as a changed person. So he acts as if the current Aiko is still alive, as she has the equivalent value to his narcissistic mind. He talks about the future they can have together, menial, classical aspects of a working life, but instantly derails when he imagines Aiko with someone else. He keeps walking and talking with her lifeless corpse hanging onto his back, the sunny weather mocking his dreadful life. He keeps carrying her, cleaning her face up a bit more, eventually resting in the shade of a small building, but two children find him. Punpun gives Aiko up, cruelly leaving this dead body with children who believe she is just sleeping. The warehouse scene is one of the most debated moments within the manga, as it implies some form of time and space travel is possible within the Punpun universe. When they were just kids in the warehouse, they all saw some figure gloomily staring at them from the rooftop, and Punpun tries protecting Aiko from this spectre, which is incredible foreshadowing, as it is confirmed to have been a future, older Punpun staring back at them, reflecting on his past. He sees his younger self as a demon as well, believing he has always been this depressed, spiteful piece of shit. Interestingly, he claims he is strong now, which may refer to his dying emotions, mistaking his emotional reactions to things in the past as weakness, or his ability to make life-shattering decisions and be violent as a worthy strength to have. He used to go with the flow, content with watching others from a distance. But when Aiko arrived, he wanted to act, to claim her, protect her, and love her. Thinking that with Aiko dead, he has finally broken the curse of her memory and can be an empty husk that is unbreakable to life's constant battering. So the only thing to do now is to end it all. It is obviously twisted and mentally sick reasoning, but he stabs himself in the eye after telling the concept of God to die. The hardest title drop in the manga comes next, with Punpun finally closing his remaining eye to sleep, saying goodbye and goodnight to God, Aiko, himself, but the world is not done with him yet. Good night. Punpun. Sachi, the tragic heroine, arrives to pick up this mess of a person, like an angel from above that Punpun simply could never see due to his blindness from Aiko. He is a demon, born from tragedy, his anger all but spent, and I believe Asano wants us to both hate and pity Punpun at this point. Aiko is obviously always the biggest victim. I won't settle for Punpun taking that title, but Asano did say Punpun gets the worst possible ending for him personally, as he must continue living his ruined life, forced along by Sachi and good people around him. He has a dream sometime later, talking to Aiko, saying all the mellow but melancholic things he wished he could. During their time together, it was mostly abusive, dark, and foreboding, but here it is soft. Aiko in this dream is once again an idealistic fantasy, as she is subservient and does not speak as she is dead. He is fine with moving forwards with the wind's guidance pushing him, as nothing matters at all anymore. Despite her Tanabata wish that he would never forget her, Punpun admits that slowly but surely, the refreshed memory of her fades with each passing year, but still, he has guilt and regret over what he did to her, apologizing again and again. It is a painful scene to read and analyze, and that unpleasant empty feeling within us is sparked over and over, making us want to cry profusely. The final chapter of the manga is from Harumin's perspective, implied to be at least a year on from Aiko's death, due to Sachi's baby having grown up a bit. The two men bump into each other randomly and have an awkward, disjointed conversation about life. But they don't know each other anymore, so naturally it would be awkward, and Punpun brings up the most stray topic ever with the Porn Watchers Club from their childhood. The reason we see Punpun through Harumin's perspective is to show us what a stranger sees when looking at Punpun. They see a scar on his eye, but beyond that, nothing. Everything Punpun has gone through, his pain, torment, any emotion, it is rendered as completely unknown to anyone else. It really helps elevate the gravity of Punpun's story, as it shows everyone can be hiding deep trauma, pain or villainy behind their societal mask, the two waving as they depart. So that is the story of a boy who grew into a monster, coddled by grotesque and ignorant hands from young, that altered all his perceptions with unhealthy coping mechanisms, allowing for him to delude himself with idealized pasts and silent suffering. There are so many parts that I simply have not mentioned, else this video would be hours long, so I covered the main moments of his tragic life. But I cannot forgive Punpun for the evil he did against Aiko, as well as being a terrible person in general, and all the people who he hurt as well, such as Sachi. However, this story is a lesson to be a better person. We must not repeat the mistakes of our parents, and the future of our children depends on our kind-heartedness and desire to give them the best. The different forms of Punpun represent his mental state at the time, pretty obvious. He begins as a cute, wingless bird with not much emotion or facial features, as he is naive, passive, and just doesn't have a personality. But slowly as he grows, altering in shape, exhibiting his emotions at that specific moment, such as when he turns into a triangle. The continual metamorphosis allows the reader to infer how Punpun is feeling without his outward statement, allowing us to connect with him even further. Eventually he becomes a demonic black entity, showing that he feels like a monster for everything he has done, and his hatred of humanity and adult selfishness that ruined his life. He transforms back into that white, bird-like being at the end, but I feel he still sees himself as a demon. It was simply due to Harumin's perspective that he became a white bird again, as the story emphasizes the lack of connections he has and how no one can see his true self. But that is all I have to say for now. Oyasumi, Punpun, and peace out.